Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, highlights from the 2025 Defense News Conference. We bring you some of the most newsworthy pieces of this year's event, held at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Washington, D.C., just across the river from the Pentagon. On deck are a pair of lawmakers deep in the weeds of defense policy and military intelligence, and an industry expert from the national security sector. It's the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. Each year, Defense News gathers luminaries and heavy hitters from around the defense industry and service branches for an annual look at the state of U.S. defense. For 2025, we gathered several top members of Congress and experts from across the national security sector to give their takes on the threats facing the American military and what can be done to stay ahead of the global curve. First up, House Armed Services Committee member Representative Don Bacon speaks to Carla Babb about his views on the state of play in U.S. defense and how to deter China on a global scale.
I want to start by having you give me the big picture perspective. You have flown in EC-130s, you know all about disrupting command and control. What are some of the things that you feel the U.S. military is doing well in the information battle space, and what are some of the things that it needs to work on?
Well, we just have to remember information operations is a broad umbrella with a lot of different subparts to it. Deception is one, which I studied, during some of my military education courses that I took. In fact, I'm published when it comes to deception. Also, strategic communications, conveying a very clear message that you want your own team to know, but also your adversary. Jamming or electronic warfare is another subpart to this. And I did that as well. I flew on an electronic warfare aircraft for 11 years with the EC-130 Compass Call. And so I've had different parts of the information warfare or information operations mission. And I think democracies and America can do very well at all of this, but you have to have a plan and you have to have it well coordinated at all levels. So a lot of people will think, for example, democracies are that good when it comes to deception, but yet we've had some of the best deception efforts in history of warfare. And you can just look at World War II with some of the major deception plans that we operated successfully there. So America can do very well with this, but it's got to be thought out. And I think you got to train people when they're young and raise them up to think this way. But we're very capable of doing it. And we've had some highlights. We've also had some misses.
So give us some examples. How do you think we did? You mentioned deception. We talked about the diversion of the bombers during the recent operation against Iran. Do you think that worked well? Do you think it could have been done? Do you think it could have been better executed? What are your thoughts?
It seems to me that the president and the defense team did a very good job with deception. In that, I think they lulled Iran to be complacent. They had them looking the other direction for bombers, but also the president said he wanted some more time to do talk. So I think it probably conveyed a message that an attack wasn't imminent, and then we hit them by surprise. And I think using the B-2 was very good because they're very hard to detect, and Iran doesn't have those capabilities. Unlike China has a little bit better capabilities to track the B-2. But I think the president and the defense team did a good job on this when it comes to making Iran complacent before we actually struck them.
So focusing on the Indo-Pacific, one of the parts of disruption is, of course, cyber warfare. So how concerned are you that actors like China or North Korea will be able to penetrate our communications technology?
Well, that's a real threat. China is right now our biggest cyber threat. I would have said 2 years ago that was Russia, but China has surpassed them in the cyber realm. And that doesn't mean Russia has gone away at all. They're just as dangerous as they ever were in the cyber realm, but China's just gotten that much better. In fact, they have a cyber command that is 10 times bigger than ours. And so one of the things that I would like to get done in my last year and a half in Congress is to help push or at least acknowledge that we got to grow our capabilities in cyber command. We've had a steady state and size for a decade now, roughly, and we're going to have to grow this capability if we want to counter China. But cyber is a real threat from China. North Korea is a little bit lesser, but they've shown they do have capabilities in this area. I think one of the areas we could do better when it comes to China is more strategic communications. We should be focusing on the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, what happened to the freedoms for all those people living in Hong Kong. We should be able to put China on the defense here, if you ask me. We also need to convey that we're going to supply Taiwan with the weapons they need. And as hard as it's been for Russia to conquer Ukraine, it's going to be just that hard for China to conquer Taiwan. But I think we could do a little more better communications to create a stronger deterrence message when it comes to China in relationship with Taiwan.
Well, so on that topic, China has stated that it wants to be ready to take control of Taiwan by 2027, by force if necessary, they've said, and that is during President Trump's time in office. Do you think the military is ready for a potential conflict about Taiwan, and do you believe that President Xi means it when he tells the president that China will not invade Taiwan during Trump's presidency?
Yeah, I don't think we can trust what President Xi says as much as we can't trust President Putin either. They're both dishonest leaders, and they're in charge of totalitarian governments. So they're not beholden to their people like America is or other democracies. Day one of the war with China and Taiwan is a day too late. We have to deter that now. And we do that by providing Taiwan the weapons they need. And we're way behind in providing these weapons. But Taiwan needs lots of sea mines that can interdict amphibious ships coming across the straits. They need more Harpoon missiles that can sink ships. They need more long-range air defense missiles and, I would say, ballistic missile defenses as well. These are the things that Taiwan needs now, and we should provide it to them because it will prevent war. And preventing war is the cheapest way to win in this case, right? We don't want a war. It's very expensive. So it costs money now, but spending that money now on deterrence could save us a lot more in the long run.
And so do you think that China is sufficiently deterred at this point in time?
No, I do think them watching the struggles of Russia and Ukraine probably bothers them because everybody thought Russia could win in 2 weeks. Now, 1 million casualties later, for Russia alone, they've only taken 20% of Ukraine. In fact, they've only taken 1% of Ukraine in the last 2 years, right? And so I think if you're China, you're looking at, boy, that's a very hard fight. How hard is Taiwan going to be? Well, they got to go through 90 miles of water. That's hard. That's farther than Normandy and World War II, right? So I think China, I don't know that they're deterred by our capabilities, but I do think it bothers them what's going on in Ukraine and how hard this has been for Russia. But that's why we got to send weapons now to Taiwan to bolster that deterrence. And our spending right now is inadequate for deterrence. We're spending 2.9% of our GDP, which is the lowest since 1940. We should be spending 4% of our GDP. Now we are this year because of the reconciliation bill. It's a one-time $150 billion fix. But then the president came back this year with an old budget, right? So we're going to spend $150 billion extra this year. Next year, if we did what the president wanted, we'd go back to normal, 2.9%. And most of us in Congress we think that's inadequate. We should be trying to keep it at 4% GDP spending so that we can buy B-21s faster, the new stealth bomber. We're only producing one attack submarine a year right now. That's too little to deter China. We need to be doing 2.5 attack submarines a year. So we should be spending at a level that allows us to build our defenses. That will deter China. But right now, our actions are not matching the words. And I think that China sees that.
When we come back, a national security consultant weighs in on some of the top security concerns in the Indo-Pacific. Stay with us. Welcome back. The world's attention in 2025 is focused on the Indo-Pacific theater and the influence being exercised by China in the region. For analysis on how to think through some of the specific threats, we sat down with Rob Hargis from Crux Advisory.
All right, Rob, thanks for joining us.
Yep.
Let's start with a bit of an introduction to yourself and your rather remarkable background in the space for anyone a bit unfamiliar.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me. My name is Rob Hargis. I'm the president and founder of Crux Advisory. We're a small boutique advisory firm, largely crisis management, lots of focus on critical infrastructure, and lots of focus on Indo-PACOM. So you put all that together, and I think truth in advertising here, I was a guest up till a couple minutes ago, and good crisis management. I think we had some scheduling issues here, and as they say about good journalists, never become part of the news. My advice to all of you, and it's early in the day yet, but as a conference attendee, never become part of the program. So appreciate the opportunity to fill in, and hopefully we can address the Venn diagram overlap of some cyber and some Indo-PACOM topics here today. So
let's start a bit more broadly, 50,000-foot view. When you look at the broader challenges in Indo-PACOM, what are some of the most distinct and important realities that you would want more Americans to know about or pay closer attention to?
Sure. I think we're, as many of you probably spent time in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, what you would always tell the new folks coming into country is don't get complacent, right? Complacency is what kills. Looking at your telephone while you're at a stoplight, not having situational awareness, those are the types of things that end up hurting us. And when it comes to Indo-PACOM, I think we're very focused on our daily life, day to day, not just in the national security community and the economic community and the public policy community, but also in our daily life. And are we prepared for contingencies that emanate from the Indo-PACOM region? If we're not thinking about that, it's the equivalent of not preparing for hurricane season if you live in the Gulf states as we get into that time of year. You know it's coming. You're not quite sure when. You're not quite sure what the intensity is, but it's going to happen, whether it's this year or next year. So what I would urge people to do, and what I would urge professionals in this room to do, is be a little bit of a disciple on having critical awareness of those types of threats to infrastructure and to the dynamics of how we live, regardless of the country you're from. I see some unfamiliar uniforms, so I'm going to presume we haven't changed the Army's pinks again, right here in the front. So it's not just an American thing, it's an Australian, it's a UK, it's a US, it's a Canadian, it's anybody that might get in the middle, most particularly between China and Taiwan. And I think what we're not fully aware of are the non-kinetic threats and the non-kinetic preemption that will likely occur before a straits crossing or an incremental blockade of Taiwan. And those are the things that I would do as a red team participant, and I spent a lot of time on red teams in a past life at the Pentagon, where Sun Tzu said it best, I think, over 2,000 years ago. The greatest generals that ever lived, you've never heard of because they never had to go to war. They defeated their enemies through political, economic, and social means. And so a lot of what I do, a lot of what we do at Crux Advisory is work with companies on critical infrastructure protection. We work with small and medium-sized cities, municipalities, and towns in the US, the UK, and Australia. And we look at the threat vectors, the non-kinetic threat vectors that we already see appearing and emanating out of the PRC. And what I mean by that is you can go back over the course of the last 2 years, plenty of public testimony on Capitol Hill from the FBI, from CISA, about threat vectors and APTs, adaptive persistent threats, that are already inside of our critical infrastructure. And that would include what we call the Typhoon series of adaptive persistent threats or threat actors. Volt Typhoon, Flax Typhoon, Silk Typhoon, pick a typhoon. Some are inside of our ISPs, our internet service providers. Some are inside of our critical public works Some are inside a lot of our SCADA and OT technologies and IoT, Internet of Things. And what's occurring is, and as we're looking at these threat actors that are inside our critical infrastructure, they're not doing anything. It's a very unusual behavior. They are what we consider LOTL, living off the land. So think about that crazy survivalist with the cabin up in the woods. He's completely disconnected, and you go, what's he prepping for? We have the equivalent of those threat actors already inside and proven, confirmed. There's lots of public testimony on it. It just hasn't really hit the general public yet.
When we come back, our financial expert is back with her latest tips for enhancing your financial lethality. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Recurring bills can be both painful to pay and easy to ignore. On this week's edition of Money Minute, Jeanette Mack from Navy Federal Credit Union brings you tips on how to handle those monthly expenses.
The best way to stay on top of your recurring bills is with automatic recurring payments. Late fees and interest charges are a drain on your budget, so why let them eat at your income when paying bills like rent, car loans, and credit card bills can be easily automated? You can pay regularly occurring bills out of your bank account on a set billing cycle. You can set it and forget it, knowing you're always paying on time, every time. Most banks and credit unions have a service called Bill Pay, allowing you to set up payments to your designated payees on a regularly occurring schedule, like after every paycheck or on the first of the month. It's totally up to you, and it's totally worth it for the convenience and peace of mind you get knowing your bills are paid. It also helps you see more easily where your money is going and how much you have left to spend or save monthly. While you're at it, make good use of your bank or credit union's notification services. Notifications add an extra layer of protection for your accounts and are another great way to stay on top of your finances and ahead of the game.
To get more coverage of military and defense topics, flip down those NVGs and swivel toward militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to be the most up-to-date cyber warrior stalking the digital domain, sign up for our Early Bird Brief, compiled each morning bringing you the most recent headlines. And if social media is how you stay up to date, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X. And we're on TikTok, so go follow us there as well. When we come back, Representative Rob Wittman offers thoughts on the National Defense Authorization Bill. Welcome back. As a member of the House Armed Services Committee, Representative Rob Wittman is knee-deep in the defense budgeting process. As part of Defense News Conference 2025, he sent in remarks from his office on the Hill to give an update on the latest. Have a look.
Hey folks, I'm Congressman Rob Wittman, and I wish I could be there to join you this week to give you in person an update on what's happening with the National Defense Authorization Act and defense approach, but I'll try to give you a short overview with where things are. The House has now passed the amendment submission deadline for the National Defense Authorization Act, and well over 1,000 amendments have been submitted. We will try to work through all of those as quickly as we can when the bill comes to the floor next week. The Senate is taking up their version of defense authorization this week. It looks like they will try to work through a bill that at least gives a framework of what the Senate puts out, but will not potentially be voted on by the full Senate. That's most likely the version that's going to be conferenced in relation to what the House passes out, hopefully sometime next week. So we see that progressing in the next several weeks to hopefully be able to get to a committee of conference and work out the differences between the two bills. If you look at the amounts in both bills, you see that the House bill marks to the president's budget, both on the authorization side and the appropriation side. It's around $848 billion. The Senate marks to a number that's about $32 billion higher than the president's budget or the House's number. So we'll have to reconcile that difference between those two bills and figure out how do we get to a point where we can get the necessary votes to pass both the House and the Senate. It funds a number of very important priorities, things like Golden Dome, shipbuilding, modernization, weapons magazine depth, munitions and missiles. All those things are incredibly important, as well as modernization for us to fund new platforms, especially exquisite platforms, as it matters in what we're doing going forward, but also, in addition to the exquisite platforms, funding the expendables and attritables. That's a big part of modernizing our forces, and that's very apparent as you look at the conflict that we see in Ukraine. The efforts have to revolve around us continuing to keep government operating. I know there's a lot of consternation, myself included, about using continuing resolutions to continue to fund the government. Folks, I suspect that we'll have at the very least a short-term CR, but there's a lot of back and forth about what that will be and if it will indeed pass. I am not in favor of a government shutdown. I think those are incredibly harmful. They waste billions of dollars, and it's just an abdication of our responsibility to get a job done. If you look to the reconciliation bill, the $150 billion additional dollars is a good help in getting our military modernized, but all of the positive effects of that go away if we have a long-term CR. I would argue it is even impacted by a short-term CR, but not as much as if you go to a year-long CR like we had last year. You look at how the appropriations are laid out in the reconciliation bill, and it's about $113 billion in the first year. A lot of that potentially would get eaten up by a CR if the CR goes for the full year. So I'm adamantly opposed to that. We need to get the job done. I understand there are divisions here, but those divisions should not get in the way of us getting legislation passed. And I want to make sure that we get appropriations bills done. If we have a CR, which is looking more and more likely, there's no way we get all of this done by the end of September. I want it to be as short a term CR as possible to make sure we continue to keep the government open and we continue down the road of getting things done in the interest of our nation. That's our basic responsibility here. So I think that those things will get done. There'll be a lot of noise, a lot of consternation back and forth, but I think you'll see both bodies pass some version of the National Defense Authorization Act. I think that both of those bodies' versions will go to conference, so the House and Senate version will go to conference. I believe, too, now that the House has passed the Defense Approach Bill, that there is at least a path forward on defense approach, but we have to be able to get to getting that passed between both bodies, which means there most likely will be a short-term CR, and that in and of itself is problematic, but I think that we will be able to get these things done. It is a high wire act, especially with narrow majorities in the House and then needing 60 votes in the Senate. Those are not easy milestones to reach, but I am confident that we will get there and make sure we get the critical work of the nation done. So, folks, again, I wish I could be there with you in person, but that's the most up-to-date reflection on what's happening on the authorization side and appropriation side and what we're doing to continue to fund the government.
Well, that's all we have time for in this episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.